Hey, Gary's Gulch, welcome back. Those of you that are watching on video can see that I'm a little bit more dressed up than I typically am. I had to up my game a little bit. It's really for two reasons, two purposes. I just finished an interview with a college professor. Used to be a gentleman who worked for me in the Navy. He's a college professor in the Middle Eastern Seaboard region, and he's doing a PhD thesis on crisis leadership, how you develop crisis leadership, how you work through crises, what techniques have I learned that have best served me in a crisis. And initially, he asked for a crisis that has occurred in the last 5 years. I found out going throughout the interview that that was really just so you could remember all the details about it, what it felt like, what was happening. I don't think that's necessary. Personally, I can remember vividly some of my larger crises that I went through years and years ago. The other part of that was that I was thinking, I think I'm going to follow that. I'm going to do the last 5 years, meaning initially it was requested, but after getting clarification, I realized I didn't really have to follow the 5 years. But I also found it challenging to be able to talk about things that happened in the military without getting into classified information. So I was a bit challenged there. Then I realized, and this is a good ending or a good result, I was sharing with my wife that I can't find any actual true crises that have happened in the last 5 years. These have all been first world problems. You all might think, gosh, Gary, you've been doing these podcasts for 5 years, and there's always things that I talk about, something that went south with an investment or a business or just family relationship or whatever, that sounds like a crisis. And a lot of things I talk about are national crises having to do with politics and loss of personal rights and things like that. And that's not something that really I had to personally deal with and take charge of or correct. But going back to why have I not had personal crises? In my experience, other than a family member being hurt or going through an illness, those are certainly things that are going to affect all of us. And thankfully, through the grace of God, I've not had to go through any of those recently. Typically, though, when somebody's talking about a crisis, they're talking about a financial crisis. If you think about, at least it starts with finance. They lose their job, somebody sues them. It's something that's business related or personal financially related that is causing the crisis. And that's a first world problem, meaning that we're not being chased by the saber-tooth tiger. Yet we are wired to respond to things as if we are being chased by that tiger. And I have intentionally, it is my job in my business, and it is my daily focus, which is why it's on all of these podcasts, to set up my life and help my clients and their families and their businesses be set up in a way in which we are resilient from financial crisis. That's the whole point of the wealth maximization account, or what I more recently refer to as a family bank, being this safe, liquid, guaranteed resource that does double or triple duty. It is a very efficient place to incentivize you to save cash. Many people have in their minds, they've been taught that cash is trash and that we need to go put it to work somewhere. We need to go farm it out, invest it somewhere. And the word investment means I've put my money at risk of losing it completely, if I'm being honest, for the opportunity to make it grow faster and have it come home with some friends, as I say. Yet we have to remember that first part about that phrase. Yes, it's cool that we found a place where we think it's going to come home with friends, maybe even like a 17% return on itself or an increase in equity and a 10% return. Those all sound very exciting. Yet the reason that somebody is offering those interest rates is because of the risk associated with the investment. I have railed in the past about a person that I knew in the real estate world who was offering 17% return to put your money into a fund and have that individual go buy businesses and things like that with it. There was absolutely no collateral, and that's why I never invested with him, even though he asked me personally numerous times to do. And he's now being investigated by the SEC and the FBI. And it's because the investment went poorly and people got ticked. These people who are holding him accountable instead of holding themselves accountable, to remember that this is an investment. Investment means I'm risking losing the money. And there's a meter to determine, by the way, how much risk you're taking. It's a very simple meter. We've talked about it in the past, but I just want to reiterate. The interest rate, the offer that you're getting, the return on your investment is directly related to how much risk you're taking. And then I had some clients and people who I have met in mastermind that we've talked about recently, and they started offering the exact same deal. The difference here, though, is that one of the leaders of the group, he was creating a fund to build a compound, a family compound, to put on events for the mastermind. and for his family. And it's in the state of Florida, which has unlimited homestead exemption. And I said to the clients who were asking me about this, and those that I thought would listen to me if I shared it without a question or an ask from them, I told him, like, listen, not only is there no collateral on this, but it is specifically set up in a state that will shield this for you. Now, whether that's good or bad, I'm sure the state of Florida has shielded some stuff for some bad characters in the past. But it is the freedom-minded approach that Florida brings to property ownership. You can go back to the O.J. Simpson case where he lost the civil case. He won the actual murder charge case, or it basically got thrown out essentially with that glove that wouldn't fit, if you remember that 30 years ago. But he lost the civil case just a few years after that. But between those cases, or maybe right before the first case, he moved everything he owned to Florida and locked it up in homestead exemption and lost the civil case. But he never had to pay anything. And it wasn't until after he passed a year or so ago that his estate finally paid the estate of the family of the husband, his ex-wife's husband, that he had supposedly killed. What do we say today so we don't get in trouble and get canceled by the media? He allegedly killed. Okay, a little bit off topic. But my point is, investment means I've put my money at risk of loss. And that's why I have learned personally and try to share with others over time, repeatedly, over and over again. Gary doesn't learn that fast, and so I guess I just have to be and provided opportunity to reinforce the lessons that I learned. And the lessons are that you cannot invest in tier 4. You can't invest in being so far removed from your money that you're simply gambling. You're just flat out gambling. And so what I've learned in crisis investing, if you will, is that you have to be able to maintain a level of control. And that means control over the integrity of the people who have your money, over your money being lost because a person didn't know what they were doing, because they chose a poor investment timing or product to put it in. You can make some of these same mistakes personally. Again, that's why it's called investment. You starting a business is an investment. You buying a property is an investment. You taking a course to increase your own skills in a place where you're not going to have good skills or there's no need for that skill, then that's an investment that's going to go south. Somebody who goes for the quintessential Egyptian basket weaving class where there's no employers and builds up a bunch of student debt, that is an investment gone bad in themselves. So back to this crisis leadership kind of questions. So he asked, what have I learned and how do I control emotion, and what have I learned about the people that I'm leading, like the other leaders in my organization? And so I just thought I would give a couple of highlights from that. It was a PhD thesis interview, so it got a little boring over time, or it got a little nuanced over time. And so I didn't want to just replay the whole thing for you. I wanted to just bring some thoughts that I'd had from it, or some big takeaways. So it is funny that sometimes when you listen to yourself speak, you say things that you didn't expect to come out, and sometimes they're good and should be something that you share with others, which is why I will often replay for you an interview of me being interviewed on somebody else's podcast, because it was an unprepared response that actually had some nuggets of useful stuff in there that I thought might be helpful for all of you. He asked questions like, one that I remember well is, how do you deal with the information? How have you trained your people to tell you about a crisis that has occurred? And a lot we were talking about from the context of a hurricane that hit here 2 years ago, and the response to being able to protect the properties, and a couple of the things I didn't expect that would come up that I was saying were crises. I could buy my way out of those crises because I've set up my financial life to have a ton of liquidity and to practice a lot so that the actual impact is mitigated, is limited. When I purchased my properties here, I made sure they were hurricane force rated properties and that they were elevated enough that the flooding wouldn't get them or shouldn't get them in a reasonable scenario. I took steps to mitigate the impact, yet there are no guarantees in life. So, as a friend of mine always says, is that as far as I know, none of us make it out of this thing alive. And there are no, his other corollary is that there are no luggage racks on the hearse. So you don't take the stuff with you. And so if you're going to leave things behind, ideas, financial assets, then you need to take action while you're here to set up things like a legacy, like a trust, knowledge inside those that will go beyond you so that they just don't blow everything. And so those are all wrapped up in what I do. So he asked the question of, how do you train your people, and then how do you respond when you actually do get these kinds of crisis inputs? And so I went back to the military and having a fire or a flooding report or something on a submarine, because those were true crises. Those were risk of human life loss in a big way, risk of very expensive asset loss, risk of counter-detection for the U.S. military. So big time risks, and those are things that will stick with you for the rest of your life. And a few points that I brought up that I thought might be helpful for the audience is, first and foremost, and a friend of mine, and an awesome friend of mine who was in politics his whole life and ran a business and just a great guy, he said, Gary, I think I might have invented this phrase, and that is that bad news never gets better with time. Bad news always gets worse with time. So delaying reporting of bad news, which I thought was awesome, because frankly, I thought that the U.S. nuclear submarine force, or maybe even me, created that saying. So it was awesome to hear it from him, because I'm pretty sure he and I have never discussed that before. And so what does bad news gets worse with time even mean? It means that in a crisis, the most important thing is that you have all of the information that would be helpful for you to make a decision. And the human response is often those that work for us in our organization, or who are maybe managing our investments for us. Their response, unfortunately, and it's really human, is to delay telling bad news. Right? It's uncomfortable to tell bad news. Let's see if we can fix it before we tell the news. That can be deadly in true human or physical danger. Not telling those in the car with you to brace for impact, or get your seatbelt on, or watch duck if something's shooting at you, whatever it is, that can be really bad. And on a submarine, having somebody try to put out a fire before they report the fire can be deadly, because they die in putting out that little fire, and now the ship is 15 minutes later and finding out about it, which is more than enough to take down the whole thing. Because we lose all the oxygen, the heat exceeds, the smoke is so bad we can't operate the submarine. There's all kinds of reasons why 15 minutes, far too long. We're talking, when a fire breaks out, you need to have extinguishing agent on that thing and full fire team, hose team people coming in that direction within 1 or 2 minutes. Our standard is 30 seconds. Get the fire, get it reported within 30 seconds. And so it's very high because the risks are massive. And so you learn from there things that you can take into your real estate investments. You can take it into your operating business. You can take it into family life. And so the first and most important thing is that you train your people. In the military, we would say beat it into them. I physically did not ever beat on anybody, but you have to train it into them so that it becomes an instinctual learned response. Because we are humans, and that was my first comment in this interview, is that we just have to acknowledge that we're animals. And animals' first response is fight or flight. And there are chemicals that are released. God, in creating this amazing being, made us such that when these chemicals are released, blood flow is restricted to the brain so that it goes to the muscles so that we can run. We don't need to know the intellectual calculations and equations behind why the human body can run or should run when this thing's coming at it. We just need to shift all the resources to make the engines run fast. And it makes us do things that might not intellectually make a ton of sense. There are people who kill themselves because of financial loss. They're so stressed out that they just die, or they intentionally kill themselves, or they go on a rampage against other people. Those things don't make a lot of sense about losing a bunch of little fiat currency paper. But we do it because we are animals, and our response is often not a good one. And so I also brought up during this interview what I love about a phrase that Zig Ziglar used frequently, which is about what you do when you become scared or stressed out. And he would always say that just like when you get new medication from a doctor, the doctor is looking to make sure that you are responding, the medication is having a positive impact on you, and not reacting. If you have a reaction to medication, it could kill you. And so they're watching that closely. And reacting is more that primal action when it comes to us taking steps or actions based on something is happening to us in this first world, and something happens to our business. We lose a big client. We lose cash flow. Something happens personally where we lose out on an investment, or our kids waste a bunch of money or something. So those are first world problems. Those are things that can easily be fixed by time and effort and just working our way intellectually through problems. But our human body is going to respond like the animal that we are initially. And so how do you fix that? And so I talked about, the first most important thing is that we have to be given the opportunity to have our skills and our experiences and our training and our gut instincts weigh into the challenge at our business or in our team. And so we gotta train people to be able to tell us. They have to know that we're not gonna bite their heads off when they tell us things. And they have to understand that us finding out information as soon as possible is most important. And until we can provide feedback to them, we have to train them to be able to respond as well, to mitigate the impact, and to start the thing moving in the right direction as soon as possible. Bad news always gets worse with time. That is something that we need to tell our kids, that we need to tell the teams in our businesses, and that we have to take on board ourselves. It does not get better when you think about it and you're like, how do I shape this so that people don't get mad at me? Those of you GPs out there who have bad news to tell your investors, tell them. Tell the news. I don't know all the details, but here's what I know at the moment. Tell them early. Because if you find out that somebody has a lot of problems that they're not telling you about, you will never again have the confidence to share your money with them. You will not trust them. I promise you that. I promise you. So in your businesses, get your team to tell you problems as soon as they occur, as soon as they know anything at all. Here's the next step to that, though. Because we have trained people to tell us information as soon as possible, because they trust us, because they know that we won't figuratively bite their heads off, then they tell us stuff that is very new. It is not fully baked. We get information on the news all the time. That's for a different reason. The news media understand that we are primal animals, and they understand that when it bleeds, it reads. You can catch people's eyeballs and hold on to them if you tell them things that make them scared, things that are negative, bad news that is ill. You can get people's attention. They know this. The human body just works that way. All animals work that way. If you scare them, you have their attention. If you excite them, then you also could have their attention, but it's 3 times less powerful. And if you tell bad news, you get their attention. That is true. And so our people, if we force them, they're not going to want to tell us news. They want to go hide. That's just how we are as animals. Let's go hide first, right? And let's figure out how to tell this in a better way so that it doesn't freak out the boss. So we want to give them the safe space that they know that they can do this. But when they do make that report, now we're incentivizing them to make the report early, and they probably don't have all the information. And likely what the information they have or the impression that they have is actually worse than it really is. And that's okay. We as leaders have to understand that's okay. Typically, the reports that I got while I was in the military and in my businesses were worse than the actual event. I mentioned on a recent podcast, I got a report that my property had caught fire. I got that report 3 months after it occurred. 3 months, folks. How is that even possible? They say that I thought so-and-so reported it to you. We tried to contact you. That's BS. There's a million ways they can contact me. Okay, maybe it's a few thousand ways. And none of them worked. I'm not buying it. This was a classic example of people just wanting to get a little bit more information and then a little bit more information. And then they realized, gosh, we're weeks into this thing. We might as well get all the information before we contact them. That was ridiculous. And frankly, maybe I should have fired them for that and gone with a different manager. We'll see. I did not do, but I digress. We teach people you have to tell us so that we can have our expertise and our experience and our lessons come to bear on this situation. And then we have to acknowledge that we just pushed them hard and we've trained them, and it's now instinctual to tell us, so the information we get is probably not accurate. And it's almost a certainty that it is not exactly correct. But that's okay. It's what we want. And then I explained in the interview that what I personally do is I put a box around the situation, a figurative kind of visual box around the situation, and then I start working forward from there with the training and expertise and procedures and things that I've learned over time. In this example, I said a fire was reported, and they reported where the fire was or what they thought the fire was. And that's important because if you think about it on a ship, if it's in an electrical panel, we need to turn that electrical panel off because the electricity is causing things to burn, and it could catch to insulation and other equipment around it, and then it gets out of control. So in an electrical fire, the most important thing is turn it off. And then the next step would be make sure nothing around it is burning, and then we also have to figure out, what did we just turn off? What vital equipment did we just turn off in the ship? And so the box is around, it's in the panel, it's contained in the panel, let's say, is the report that you get. But that initial report is probably not accurate. Maybe the outside of the panel is burning and it was a trash can fire that got caught on because it was sitting next to some hot equipment, hot machinery. That's definitely happened in my career. And so I put a box around it in that it is reported to be the electrical equipment, but what I do know is that it is in this space. What other things are in that space? And so the box is bigger than what they reported because often the initial reports are not accurate. So think about it as hey, this is my business, and I get a report that so-and-so was in a traffic accident. And we think that he's okay, and that it was a single car accident. Fender bender maybe with one other car. Okay, so the box then I would actually put in it is that, hey, this could be bigger than that. Maybe he's not okay. What is his primary role in my business? And what is the impact on the business, on revenue, on the other members of the business? What's the impact on his family? Is he a single dad? Do I need to start thinking about that? What it could be a little bit bigger than that, right? So it could be that he caused the accident and then my business is liable for maybe that he hurt some other people. And so that's the initial box. And so you start asking questions, you start getting additional information, and then you realize, no, okay, this was accurate. Single car accident. He was the only one involved, and he is talking, and so he's at least okay, but they're bringing an ambulance and medical people on staff, right, or on scene. So the box just got smaller. I can eliminate all these other things, that my business is going down out of liability, that other people were killed by him, that he's not actually around, and that I have to think more about taking care of his family. And then you get additional reports, and you can bring it down even more and more. It's actually the vehicle's not even destroyed. He's just got checked out locally, and he's not going to have to go to the hospital. So you just bring the box in tighter and tighter as you get more information. Sometimes you got to expand out the box. Hey, we thought we were going to get a report from him, but the reason we were delayed another hour is because actually they had to take him to the hospital. He lost consciousness while he was there. Okay, now the box is getting bigger again. And so what I want to do is to help you visually here, since we're doing this over a podcast, or in your own mind visually, since we're doing it over a podcast, I want you to help understand how I go through crises. You evaluate the crisis. Sometimes it gets worse, sometimes it gets better, and you're constantly thinking about what are those next 2 or 3 steps. And then we train our people on the team to be able to do it as well, because we want to build a business that actually operates better when we're not there than when we're there. We don't want people having to depend on us. Imagine how bad some of these scenarios on the submarine would go if it happens at 3 a.m. and the commanding officer is asleep and no one else has the confidence to deal with the situation. You'd lose the ship. That's why almost every other Navy out there, including China, does not do anything that's risky or challenging while the commanding officer is asleep, because they have one guy that has all the knowledge, and it's a very hierarchical thing where if you take action without their permission or them giving the orders, then you're probably fired or worse. We have to have defense in depth. We have to have our people be able to take action without us. And we want that to happen in our businesses. And with our real estate, we want people to take the right action, not the wrong action when your property catches on fire. And they actually did take the right action. They just took forever to tell me about it, which is, I guess, why I didn't fire them. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. It was just a bit of a few snippets from a conversation and interview that I had that I thought you could definitely find as applicable in your situation. There are some important nuggets that have been learned in the cauldrons of fire throughout my experience and my career. And I just want to summarize those really quickly. The first one is that bad news always gets worse with time. Shout out to my friend Mike, who said this at a breakfast the other day that I was with. And it was just awesome to see how incredibly aligned I am with many of my clients. His biggest takeaway in life is one of my biggest takeaways. I don't know if it's the biggest takeaway in life, but about crisis and how to deal with it. And then we have to train such that things become instinctual, that are the most important things, to right the ship, to set the scenario in a place in which you've mitigated damage and you've started to limit it. And so getting the news early and then taking the action by putting a big box around it and considering what if it's actually worse than they said. But in most cases, it's actually not as bad, because when it reads, it bleeds, and we are going to think the worst because that's what has kept us safe way back to when we were primal beings. And so we will start to collapse the box around the problem until we get it to a point where it's easily manageable and we are calm and the blood has flowed back up to the brain, and we start to make intellectual decisions that were initially just primal responses to situations. And then we work our way down through that, and eventually we have people on our teams that can do this for us because we have also trained them to lead in that same way. One other quick question that he asked me was, how do you best evaluate who is going to be good in a crisis? And that's hard. But what I would say is that you try to simulate an actual crisis as best you can so that you know how people are going to respond. But let's not kid ourselves. And on the Normandy invasions in World War II on D-Day, when that big metal landing pad drops down in front of the people and they start running out into thousands and thousands of bullets and gunfire coming from the Germans on the shore, no one knew if they were going to lose their stuff and get trampled by the others and be frightened in fear and not unable to storm up the beach, or they were going to do the heroic thing and go up the beach. No one actually knew that unless they'd already been in gunfire before. So we simulate it as best we can. We have people study it on a book, and this is the whole cone of learning that we've talked about in previous ones that have helped me so much in my career, both in the military and personally, and I put it to work in my personal life. When I get ready to go on a racetrack, I have done all of these steps. You study things intellectually. What's the car like? What's the racetrack like? And in the military world and in my businesses, sometimes we'll be interviewed by somebody to see if we actually got the material that was in the reading or in the audio books that we had read on the topic. And then we actually sometimes take written tests on things. And then we simulate it. We get in the car racing simulator on that specific racetrack with that specific car, and we do it over and over again until we're really good at it. And then you get out with an instructor and you do parts of it. You go around the hard corner and you repeat that process and you get feedback on it. But eventually you get out there and you're doing it on your own. When I became a private pilot, we did these exact same things. We had to study things. We took tests. We demonstrated that we could do it on a simulator. We demonstrated we could do it with an instructor. And then you got out there and you did it solo. And so that's how you progress up to actually handling the real crisis. And that's how you evaluate people who are working for you in your business. Can they do the same thing? Again, I hope this was helpful. And until next time, go out there and make something amazing happen. And Gary's Gulch.